Hi, welcome to Chapter Book Storytime Variety Pack. I'm Ellen from EVPL Oakland, and today we have a mystery to solve. The book is called Hide and Geek by T.P. Jagger, and it's available in print at EVPL. To get you started in the book, I think I'm going to read a little bit of the book jacket. It summarizes what's going to happen in the book very, very well. Get you caught up, and then I'm going to jump around in the book a little bit and read different parts of it so you can help to unravel the mystery. So this story is about 4 friends, and they are called the Geeks. Gina, Edgar, Elena, and Kevin have been best friends for as long as they can remember. So when their arch nemesis points out that their initials make them literally geeks, they decide to go with it. Gina, G, Edgar, E, Elena, E, and Kevin, K. Geeks. The problem? The Geeks' hometown of Elmwood was once the headquarters of the famous toymaker Maxine Van Houten. Her popular puzzle sphere, the Bamboozler, put the town on the map. But Maxine passed away long ago, and now the toy factory is shutting down. And Elena's mom and Kevin's dad are losing their jobs. Their families might have to move, and that would mean splitting up the Geeks. The quest? Maxine left one final puzzle, a treasure hunt that could save the town and keep the friends together. But only those who know and love Elmwood best will be able to solve it. Geeks to the rescue! So, Gina, Edgar, Elena, and Kevin each have their special gifts. Gina is a journalist in training. Her mom is the editor of the local paper. She loves facts and mysteries and her 100% adorable dog, Sauce. Edgar is an actor. He's also a dairy farmer and most likely to quote the musical Hamilton. Elena is a scientist and a prankster. Do not get on her bad side. And Kevin is a math genius and a 3-time class president. So, saving the town will take all their geeky skills combined. The story starts out with a prologue. And the funny thing about it is the prologue takes place at the end of the story. Gina is looking back on all of the events that happen in the book, and she's telling it in hindsight. Prologue. Okay, by now I'm sure you've heard about everything going on in the tiny town of Elmwood, New Hampshire, tucked away in the scenic Fair Valley. You've read the headlines or seen the photos or whatever. The failings factory, the hidden fortune, the kidnappings, all that stuff. Last week, a reporter showed up all the way from Australia to get the scoop. Unfortunately, except for his cool accent, he was like every other person who's flooded into Elmwood lately, chasing a fairy tale. But me, I grew up in Elmwood, and I care about the facts. So before you judge me for not looking like a journalist, consider this. Fact number 1. Girls usually have their growth spurts between 10 and 14 years old. Fact number 2. I'm only 11, so I have another 3 years. I could totally grow past 4'6" any day now. Anyway, I may be a short, freckle-faced 11-year-old, but I'm here to set the record straight, to take a stand for the truth. After all, I'm not simply reporting what I think happened to Elmwood. I'm Gina Sparks, soon-to-be world-famous journalist, and I was there. I lived through it. Barely. And the facts are what saved my life. Well, that facts plus one little lie about Mark Twain. I realize you already know how the story ends. At least you think you do. But as with all good stories, the best place is to start at the beginning. Or if not quite at the beginning, at least the part of the story when someone dies. Ooh, I want to read more. Gina's mother, I said, is the editor of the local paper, the Elmwood Tribune. And sometimes she lets Gina write some articles to get some practice. So I'm going to read an article that came from Friday, August 20th. And that Gina wrote, but her mother has put in some little corrections and little editorial comments to help improve Gina's writing ability. Gina sometimes lets her emotions get into the paper when all you really want is facts. The Elmwood Tribune, Friday, August 20th. Last Van Houten in Elmwood found dead in rocking chair. By Gina Sparks. First draft. No paintball attacks have been reported on Scrubstone Lane since local recluse Alice Van Houten passed away recently at the age of 94. And then in brackets, Mom has written, "This is a clear and catchy lead, Gina Bean. Good job." Although the exact time of her death is unknown, her body was discovered on Wednesday, August 18th, by mailman Frank Nubbins. Mr. Nubbins spotted Ms. Van Houten seated peacefully in her rocking chair on the front porch of Van Houten Manor. When she failed to yell at him or fire paintballs to chase him off her property, he decided to investigate. The classic Van Houten Bazooka Boom Painter 2000 on Ms. Van Houten's lap was still loaded with a neon orange paintball grenade. Police Chief Luis Hernandez has confirmed that the cause of Ms. Van Houten's death was simply, quote unquote, being a really old lady. Ms. Van Houten was the eldest and last surviving child of famous local toy maker Maxine Van Houten. As a female pioneer in both engineering design and business, Maxine was best known for inventing the internationally acclaimed 3D puzzle, The Bamboozler, produced by her Van Houten Toy and Game Company. Of course, Maxine was also known for her public promises to leave the bulk of her fortune to the town of Elmwood. That ended up being a total lie. Mom scratched that one out, so she rephrased. However, after Maxine's death, the Van Houten fortune was never given to the town. Instead, it disappeared. It is believed that Maxine's frequent unexplained absences from Elmwood prior to her death may have been for secret trips to Foxwoods Casino, where she is thought to have squandered her fortune on bingo. Ever since Maxine's death on April 3rd, 1987, her greedy, strike that out, her children have neglected, strike that out, her children have turned their attentions away from their mother's company, eventually selling off the Bamboozler to a rival company, gutting our great town's heart and crushing seriously affecting, no, strike that out. Eventually selling off the Bamboozler to a rival company, seriously affecting the local economy. Ms. Alice Van Houten spent the last few decades alone in the family's estate. It is rumored that the peculiar crashing and banging noises often reported by locals passing by the now crumbling manor were in fact Ms. Van Houten searching futilely for her mother's lost fortune and going a bit batty, cross that out, and losing touch with reality in the process. If these rumors are true, they kind of served Ms. Van Houten right, considering the way her family treated our town. That all was scratched out, and with a little comment from Mom, "Be nice, Bean." Ms. Van Houten was preceded in death by her parents, Maxine and Harold Van Houten, younger siblings, Cynthia Van Houten and Harold Van Houten Jr., and 5 different cats, Otis, 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 and Otis. She is survived by her nephew, Maxwell Van Houten, and by her 14-year-old tortoiseshell cat, Otis. If you are interested in becoming the caretaker for a grumpy old cat that constantly hacks up hairballs, scratch that out. If you are interested in becoming the caretaker for a mature cat with special dietary needs, please contact the Van Houten estate, care of Mr. Thomas Ridley, attorney at law. A 2-month supply of feline queen, salmon supreme, hairball-controlled cat food is included. No public memorial service will be held for Ms. Van Houten, and the fate of Van Houten Manor is not yet known. Mom writes comments in brackets at the bottom. This is a good first draft, Bean, but don't let your personal connection to the news interfere with your ability to report without bias. Remember, a reporter must remain objective, even if she has strong feelings about her subject. Let's skip ahead to Chapter 3, to Social Studies class at the end of the school day, the only class when all 4 geeks are together. The principal has just made an announcement saying that the town council is going to hold a very important meeting tonight, and everyone should be there. The geeks are debating whether or not they should go to the meeting. Everyone should know the difference between facts and opinions, but it's especially important for a journalist. And the fact is this: my friends and I had different opinions about the town meeting. Opinion number 1, go. It's our civic duty, guys. We have to go. Participation in the democratic process is vital for a successful government. That was Kevin. Opinion number 2, don't go. Seriously? You've got to be kidding, Kev. It's going to be so boring. That was Elena. Opinion number 3, don't go. I have chores to do. Besides, I told Ollie we would finish the Wicked cast album this afternoon. That was Edgar, mistaking his heifer, Ollie, for a fellow musical theater fan. And opinion 4, go. It could be breaking news, and I'm a journalist. I have to be there. That was me, Gina, obviously. We stood outside the school arguing back and forth. 2 votes to go, 2 votes to skip, until Elena eventually said, if we skip the meeting and go to the lookout, I'll bring some of my abuela's taquitos and her chocolate chip cookies. No fair, Kevin protested. You can't. I call a vote. Boring town meeting or taquitos and cookies. My mouth watered. Once a month, Elena's grandma makes taquitos with crunchy homemade tortillas and the tenderest, most mouth-watering meat you've ever tasted. In other words, she makes the best taquitos in the world. They can only be outdone by her chocolate chip cookies, which are the best in the universe. Mom would be at the meeting, after all. Maybe 2 world-class journalists covering 1 town hall meeting would be overkill. Kevin lost the vote, 3-1. Kevin moaned, "You just undermined the entire democratic process." But then he checked his watch. "Oh, debate team starts in 10 minutes. I guess I'll see you guys at the lookout at 7 o'clock. "I have to go too," Edgar said. "Drama club." "Oh, and I've got to get some stuff done in the lab," Elena said with a wave. Just like that, I stood alone outside Elmwood Middle School. I didn't mind. Edgar, Elena, and Kevin had talents that came with clubs and rehearsals and spotlights and awards. I was used to being the observer, the one hanging out in the background. For a journalist, the background is a very useful place to be. I hopped on my bike and headed home. That night, the mystery begins. On her way to the lookout, Gina stops in the town square to look around just to see if there's anything newsworthy happening, and she notices a stranger. It's a small town, so anyone new gets noticed. A man stepped out of the lawyer's office with a set of keys in one hand and an envelope in the other. And then she goes on a little further and turns around and looks up at Van Houten Manor, and there's a light in the window. Alice Van Houten doesn't live there anymore. No one does. Why is there a light? Once she gets to the lookout, and she and her friends are eating taquitos and chocolate chip cookies, she notices a shadowy figure walking through the nature preserve, headed for Van Houten Manor. What is going on? We're moving on to chapter 6. "Come on," I whispered, picking up Sauce and heading for the ladder. "We have to follow him." "We can't stalk a stranger through the woods at night," Kevin said. "And how do you know it's a him?" Edgar asked. "I'll explain as we go." I eased my way down the ladder, not an easy task while cradling Sauce in one arm. Just stay quiet. To the rest of the geeks' credit, they all kept quiet and followed me from the lookout. When I got to the ground, I kept Sauce in my arms so he couldn't run off. "Okay, G, what's this all about?" Elena whispered. I started heading them toward the trail. "We have to go to Van Houten Manor." Kevin halted, grabbing my arm. "Are you nuts? That place is off limits." "Technically, Kev, so is the lookout," Elena said. "Let G talk." "Here's the deal," I said. "Before I came to the lookout, I was in the park and I saw a light go on in Van Houten Manor." In the shadowy moonlight, I could see all the others turn toward me. I definitely had their attention now. "And that's not the only odd thing I've seen today." The others listened as we crept along the trail, and I explained about the stranger leaving Thomas Ridley's law office and heading toward Scrubstone Lane. How I was sure I had just now spotted the same stranger slipping through the woods. How I thought he might be the person snooping around in Van Houten Manor. "But who is he?" Elena asked. "I don't know," I said, "but I have a guess." I smiled, unable to resist keeping at least a little mystery alive. And if I'm right, I thought, it may be a much bigger scoop than whatever's going on at the town meeting. About 10 minutes later, we stepped from the preserve and onto the edge of the Van Houten estate. Our footsteps crunched on the gravel driveway as we approached the house, which leaned forward like it was preparing to dive down the hillside. It was the closest I'd ever been to the sprawling three-story mansion. After all, up until a month ago, it had been protected by a 94-year-old woman armed with a paintball bazooka. Even in the dim light, I could make out the peeling clapboard and the broken railing of the wraparound porch. A crumbling stone chimney climbed the house, and half the windows were boarded over. The shutters that hadn't already dropped to the ground clung cockeyed on the single hinges, and the roof was a hodgepodge of peaks and valleys, angles and lines. A turret stuck up from the middle of the house, rising above the third story. A single light glowed from the turret's highest window like the beacon from a lighthouse. Sauce was still in my arms, but my arms were beginning to ache. He may not be a big dog, but he's a chubby one. I set him on the ground. "No more taking off," I muttered as Edgar knelt to pet him. Sauce looked up at me, eyes all wide and innocent. Not buying his act even a little, I tied his leash to the most secure porch railing I could see. "Now what?" Kevin asked, his voice shaking slightly. "Duh," Elena said. "Isn't it obvious?" She marched onto the porch and pounded on the front door. "Hello," she called. "Anyone home?" No footsteps, no new lights, nothing. We should go back," Kevin said. "No one's here." "Not yet," I replied. I stepped up to the door and knocked again. "Give him time to open the door." "What are you scared of?" Elena asked. "There's 4 of us and only 1 of him." I'm not scared," Kevin said. "I'm just cautious." Elena snorted. Behind me, Sauce whined. He looked at me and then cocked his head to one side. "What is it, boy?" I asked. "Is it something—" "Row!" Sauce took off, tugging the porch post down. The broken post banged along after him for a couple of beats before his leash slipped free. Then he skittered around the corner of the porch and out of sight. "Sauce!" I gave chase, rounding the corner of the porch, and then another. The others followed me, their footsteps pounding. I got to the back of the house just in time to see Sauce squeeze his long, chubby body through a tiny door labeled Otis. I dove for Sauce's tail, only to come up with air and belly flop onto the porch. I lurched onto my knees and shoved my head through the cat door. Too dark. When I pulled my head back out, Elena, Edgar, and Kevin stood huddled behind me. "I told you guys we should have gone back," Kevin said. "Drop it," I snapped. "Right now, the only thing that matters is getting Sauce." "What we need to get," Kevin said, "is help." Elena popped her knuckles. "We can handle this. All we need is a little nitric acid. If we drip it into the lock mechanism, the chemical reaction should—" "No way," Kevin protested. "We can't go around breaking and entering." Guys," Edgar said. "We won't be breaking and entering," Elena said. "We'll just be melting a lock, opening a door, and maybe going inside for a little bit. It's an emergency, Kev. We gotta get to Sauce." "Guys," Edgar said again. "I'm running for class president," Kevin argued. "I can't be—" "Crack!" Edgar stomped his foot so hard the entire porch shook. "Guys!" Kevin and Elena stared at Edgar. So did I. The only time I'd ever heard Edgar yell was when he played a drill sergeant in the 5th grade play. "Why don't we just try the door?" And then he turned the doorknob. The door creaked inward on rusty hinges. I almost laughed with relief. "See," Elena told Kevin, "no one's breaking, only entering." Kevin swallowed his protest and followed the rest of us into the kitchen of Van Houten Manor. Edgar had started humming "The Room Where It Happens" under his breath. The first thing I did was flick the light switch. Nothing. Apparently the power had been cut after Alice Van Houten died, which made me wonder about the light in the turret. All 4 of us shone our cell phones around the large kitchen. Cupboards hung open. Dishes, pots, and pans littered the counters. Boards had been torn up from the floor, holes punched in walls. The kitchen smelled like a mixture of sour milk, mildew, and old cat. "Sauce?" I called. The floorboards creaked as I stepped over an old spaghetti strainer. "Sauce?" I held my breath. "Row!" came a muffled, distant howl. I sprang into the next room, a dining room. The others trailed behind me. No Sauce. We dodged around a broken chair and tipped over a china cabinet, weaving from room to room, following the narrow lights of our phones. A living room, a second dining room, a library. More messes, more destruction, no Sauce. Row! Sauce, we all yelled, trying to figure out where his howl was coming from. Row! Then we found the stairs. Faint lights spilled from high above. This time, when Sauce howled, there was no doubt where the sound was coming from. We charged up one flight of stairs. A second. Sauce's howls grew closer, and so did the light. Finally, at the top of the turret, we stumbled into some sort of office. A battery-operated lantern sat on a scuffed, dust-covered oak desk beneath the room's only window. Bookshelves lined 2 of the 4 walls, although all the books lay strewn across the floor, half their pages missing. 2 red velvet chairs and a small couch had their cushions slashed, tufts of white fluff sticking out everywhere. And there was Sauce, his nose in the air, howling at a tattered floor-to-ceiling tapestry of an old guy with a long white beard and a floppy, goofy-looking hat. Thanks to Mr. Singh's social studies class, I knew the tapestry pictured the famous artist and inventor Leonardo da Vinci. Sauce! I dropped to my knees and wrapped my dog in a hug. He slurped his tongue across my cheek. You have to stop running off like that. Okay, Kevin said. We found him. Let's go before we get caught. But before we could go anywhere, Sauce wriggled from my arms and started howling at the tapestry again. That's weird, I said. He doesn't usually howl at art. Edgar pursed his lips. Everyone's a critic. Wait! Elena cupped a hand to her ear. Do you hear that? Sauce's howls paused just long enough for me to make out a faint thump, thump that sounded like Leonardo da Vinci was trying to escape his own portrait. I leaped to my feet and hauled the tapestry aside. Hidden behind it was a massive steel door with a large digital keypad lock. Chapter 7. Thump, thump, thump. Someone's trapped in there. I tugged on the door. It didn't budge. It's probably the man I was telling you about. Edgar cupped his hands around his mouth right by the door and shouted, Don't worry, we're here. Kevin put his mouth to the door too. What's the combination? He called. The only response was more thumping and some muffled, indecipherable shouts. Still, we didn't give up. Edgar and Kevin kept shouting, Sauce kept howling, I kept tugging. But it was Elena who took real action. Wait here, she said. I'll be right back. Elena dashed from the room and hurtled down the stairs. A minute later, she returned, breathing hard, holding a small, pale yellow box. What's that? Edgar asked. Cornstarch, Elena replied, from the kitchen. Expired 20 years ago, but that won't matter. Elena tore off the top of the box, grabbed a fistful of her own dark hair, and dipped the tips into the cornstarch. Kevin's forehead wrinkled. What are you doing? Obviously, I'd rather use a paintbrush, Elena said, swiping the powdery tips of her hair over the steel door's digital lock. But I didn't have time to find one. Plus, we're in a hurry. Who knows how much oxygen is left in there? But watch and learn, Elena said, and she turned toward me. Hey, G, shine your phone on the lock. I did as she ordered and watched as faint powdery fingerprints appeared on 4 keys of the digital keypad. 1, 2, 7, and 9, Elena said, reading the 4 numbers aloud. Okay, that was pretty cool, Kevin admitted, but we still don't know the order. Those 4 digits could be randomly sequenced in 24 possible combinations, but... A 4-digit code, Elena interrupted. You think whoever put this giant steel door here is only going to protect whatever's behind it with a 4-digit code? Kevin grit his teeth. If you had let me finish, he said, I was just about to say that it's more likely that a 6-digit code has been used for extra security, so at least one of the 4 digits had to be used more than once. The number of random combinations would actually be... Somebody might have made up the combination they wanted, I said. Something they could remember. What if it wasn't random? Kevin scratched his head. 6 digits. I suppose it could be a date. The thumping and muffled shouts from the other side of the door continued, a constant reminder that we needed to hurry. The 7 is more faded than the others, I said. Actually, it's a lot more faded. It must be the one that repeats. Gina's right, Edgar said. Kevin took a few ragged breaths through clenched teeth. Just give me a second to think. He scrubbed his hands over his eyes. A 7 could mean a July date, But if it's been used more than once, there would need to be a 7 in the year. Or it could be the 7th of July, Elena said. The thumping grew faster, more frantic. Maxine had probably programmed the code, so it would have been a number or date that was meaningful to her. My eyes lingered on the 7 and the 9. 79. Why was that number familiar? Could it be a date from 1979, I asked, thinking aloud. Or the 1790s, Edward cried. Maybe it's a date from the French Revolution. Raise a glass to freedom. He sang that last part, Hamilton again. Mid-eye roll, an image snapped into my mind. The engraving above the door of the town hall. I turned to Elena. Try 721779. July 2nd, 1779. The founding date of Elmwood. Elena punched the code. A green light flashed at the top of the keypad. There was a soft click. Lots of times a reporter has to take the facts and then trust her gut. My hunch had been right about unlocking the door. It had also been right about who'd been trapped behind it. A man, the man, stumbled from an empty vault, gasping for air. His gray suit was rumpled, his blue tie loosened around his neck. He wasn't very tall. Edgar had him by a couple of inches. His thinning brown hair, which had been slicked back the first time I'd seen him, was now spiked in all directions and damp with sweat. A stubbly beard shadowed his face. She booby-trapped the vault door, he mumbled to himself, his blue eyes wide. And then he blinked, focusing on us for the first time. You saved me. But how did you know I was here? My dog found you, I pointed at Sauce. We were just chasing after him, and then we heard the pounding. I studied the man, comparing him to the statue of Maxine Van Houten in the park. They didn't look much alike, but they both had long noses and similar shoulders, and there he was in Van Houten Manor. I had to know if my hunch was correct. Are you Maxwell Van Houten? I held my breath. If I was right, then this man was Alice Van Houten's nephew and the only surviving descendant of Maxine Van Houten. My question seemed to snap him from his daze. I'm sorry, he said. Where are my manners? Yes, of course I am. He reached out to shake my hand. But please, call me Max. And thank you for saving me from Aunt Alice's trap. Max smiled, his eyes crinkling at the edges while he smoothed out the wrinkles in his suit. It sure didn't take you long to figure out who I was. Let me guess. You also must have been the one who figured out the combination. Heat rushed to my face at the man's Max's compliment. Well, it was a team effort, Kevin said. We all figured it out. Ah, of course, Max said, but I thought I detected a knowing twinkle in his eyes. Then he sank into a wobbly chair behind the oak desk. I hope you don't mind if I sit down. Please, join me. Sauce had apparently been waiting for an invitation. He leapt onto the torn-up couch, sending a cloud of dust puffing into the air. Elena and I sat down beside him. Kevin and Edgar sat in one of the ragged red velvet chairs. As soon as we'd all introduced ourselves, and Sauce, of course, Max leaned his elbows on the desk and rested his chin in his hands. So, Gina, you said Sauce sniffed me out, but what brought you up to the manor in the first place? I thought of Elmwood's rundown park, all the houses for sale, the newspapers lost subscribers. I tried to keep the hope from my voice as I asked, Are you here to help the town? Even though I dealt in facts, not luck, I crossed my fingers. Help? Max asked. How? I saw you leaving Thomas Ridley's law office this afternoon. I thought you must have some money left from your grandma's company. I shoved down the memory of the final notice paper on my mom's desk. I thought maybe you'd use it to help Elmwood, like she always said she would. Max rubbed at the shadow of the beard on his cheeks for a long moment. Let me be honest with you, he said. I'm not proud of the way my family acted after my grandmother's death. I was sent off to boarding school at Grantwood Prep from the age of 12, so I missed most of it. But it didn't take them long to drive the company into the ground, then squander what little profits remained on vacation homes and expensive parties instead of reinvesting in the company. Max looked slowly from me to Edgar to Elena to Kevin. In short, I'm as broke as Elmwood. So this is what having your hopes dashed feels like, I thought. Aunt Alice's lawyer, Mr. Ridley, shared another bit of unexpected news with me today as well, Max continued. Your mayor just finished sharing it with the rest of the town. The town meeting, I thought. The geeks all looked at Max. I held my breath. Apparently, Max said, when my uncle sold the Bamboozler to a rival toy company, their agreement stated that the Elmwood factory would only be able to continue producing Bamboozlers for a certain amount of time. That time is now up. Edgar blinked. What does that mean? Kevin's eyes were wide. It means the Van Houten Toy and Game Company will be shutting down for good. He swallowed and glanced at Elena, which means my dad and Elena's mom won't have jobs anymore. Elena looked like she might be sick. They can't do that. The people here have dedicated their lives to making Bamboozlers. They belong to Elmwood. I put a hand on Elena's arm, but she shrugged it off. She glared at Max. My mom has worked at Van Houten Toys for 20 years. Max raised his hands in surrender. I'm sorry, truly, I didn't know anything about this until today. It's out of my control. The toy company? Shutting down forever? This wasn't the scoop I'd been hoping for when we'd followed the trail to Van Houten Manor. It might be the factory closing, but it wasn't just factory jobs at stake. Who would be left in town to afford a newspaper? What would Mom and I do? I blinked back tears, wishing I could bury my face in Sauce's fur. For a long time, no one spoke. No one moved. Then Max cleared his throat. He nodded to himself like he'd made a decision. I don't have any money to help Elmwood, and I can't get the Bamboozler back, but, well, maybe together we can do something. Kevin sat forward on his chair. What do you mean? I assume you've heard the stories about my grandmother, Max said. About how she supposedly gambled away her entire fortune? Of course, we all said. The thing is, Max replied slowly, I always believed those stories. I thought squandering money must simply run in the family. But when I arrived at the manor earlier today, I found something interesting. He pulled open a drawer on the desk and drew out a couple of sheets of yellowed paper filled with old-fashioned typewriter lettering. He handed them to me. Go ahead, Gina. Read them out loud. I think you'll agree. Max's blue eyes sparkled as they met mine. Those 2 sheets of paper could change everything. April 2nd, 1987. Greetings, fellow citizens of Elmwood. Thank you for joining me this evening. I realize I've been rather cryptic regarding the purpose of this town meeting, so I appreciate your willingness to indulge my eccentricities. After a lifetime of puzzle making, I suppose such secrecy is a habit I'm incapable of breaking. I requested today's gathering for 2 reasons. I have both good news and bad news. However, I have never been a person who dwells on the negative, so I will dispense with the bad news first and state it plainly. I am very sick. In recent months, I have taken numerous trips to New York City to consult with medical specialists. The news has not been good, and the time I have left is short. However, I will not linger on this fact. Instead, I must ask you all to accept one simple truth. We must go on because we can't turn back. Now, on to the good news. You may have heard whispers about my intentions, and the whispers are true. I will leave my fortune to this town. However, the years have forced me to accept the ill effects greed can have on people. Therefore, I want to ensure that my fortune will be managed by a worthy steward. I have thought at length of how this might be achieved. Ultimately, I determined to take the route most consistent with my life's work. I made one last puzzle. My fortune is now hidden within the town of Elmwood, a town I have loved so dearly, along a path that can only be uncovered by a worthy seeker who is able to untangle the clues and interpret the signs. For as long as the finder of my fortune lives, he or she will be entrusted to use the fortune solely for the service of this great town. Here is the first clue. I hadn't even looked up from reading the letter's last line before Elena, who was reading over my shoulder, blurted, "Wait, what? That's it? Mad Maxine wrote, 'Here's the first clue,' and then stopped? Oh, sweet Einstein, you've got to be kidding me." She snatched the 2 pages from my hands and flipped them over. Something about Maxine's words sounded familiar, but I couldn't figure out why. "I found the letter in here," Max said. He tapped the top of the desk. "Look at the date. April 2nd, 1987. Maxine, my grandmother, died the very next day. That means she never got to call the town meeting. She never got to give this speech." I suddenly thought of the rumors about Maxine's mysterious trips from town and how she'd been blowing the fortune on bingo. In reality, she'd been visiting doctors in New York. Even I had believed those rumors. Instead, I should have been looking for the facts. "So we've been wrong about Maxine all this time," I murmured. "Maybe she gave the letter to Alice so she could deliver the message for her. Or maybe Alice just found it after Maxine died. Either way, it's not Maxine's fault Alice kept the information secret. Plus, it explains all of this." I kicked at a loose floorboard and grabbed a wad of stuffing from one of the slashed couch cushions. "Alice has been searching for the fortune since 1987. "It also explains the booby-trap vault door," Edgar said. "And don't forget Alice's paintball bazooka," Elena added. "The thing is," Kevin said, "now that we know all of this, we can't keep it a secret. My mom's on the select board. Elena's dad is the chief of police. We've got to tell them about this. They'll know what to do." Kevin stood and took a step toward the door. "Wait," Max said, a new firmness in his voice. Kevin froze, physically incapable of disobeying a direct adult order. "I was at tonight's town meeting," Max said, his voice softening. "I planned to read my grandmother's farewell address to everyone. But, well, when people heard the news about the bamboozler, they were surprised, worried, angry. They started shouting and arguing over who was to blame and what to do. Suddenly, I had second thoughts about reading the letter." He sighed. "I'm afraid the search for the fortune would tear the town apart, not bring it together. If we find the fortune, I have every intention of abiding by my grandmother's wishes," he said. "The money will belong to Elmwood. But it's like she said in her speech, we need a worthy seeker to find the fortune. Or perhaps," Max looked at each of us in the eye, "4 worthy seekers." Sauce barked. Max laughed. "My apologies, Sauce. 5. "You mean us?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "By saving me from the vault, you proved you have exceptional problem-solving skills." Max looked right at Kevin. "All 4 of you provided that." Kevin stood a little straighter. "And Gina's first question for me was whether I was here to help the town," Max added, "while everyone else is still arguing. You've shown me how much you care about Elmwood. I can't think of anyone better suited to undertake this quest, to solve my grandmother's final puzzle." "But how can we do that?" Elena asked. "We don't have the first clue." Max pulled out one final sheet of paper. His eyes twinkled. "Oh, yes," he said, "we do. This is the first clue. Life's not a matter of holding good cards, but of playing a poor hand well. If you're seeking out a scholar's treasure, then look to his citadel. There in the highest pinnacle of our humble little town, your eye will glimpse the sour key that leads you to my crown." And so they're off to solve Maxine Van Houten's final puzzle and to find the treasure and save the town. The mystery is called Hide and Geek. Can you help solve the clues? Thanks for joining me today on Chapter Book Storytime Variety Pack. I'll be back in a few weeks with another mystery. Bye-bye.